Well, I am assuming we are live, so I'm going to welcome everyone. Welcome to the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County Forum for United States Representative, Congressional District 1. I'm your moderator, Karen Crowley. I'm president-elect of the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County. We are so pleased you are here with us on a warm summer evening. You know, the League's mission is to empower voters and to defend democracy, and that is what we hope to do tonight and what you're doing tonight by joining us. So thank you for being here. I want to do a few other thank yous. Our live stream is sponsored by the Sultan School District with technical help from Dave Moon and a terrific team of students at turkpride.tv. And I'm going to ask them to come onto the screen for just a moment and say hi so you can see them. Turk Pride TV, say hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much. We have had so much fun working with them and helping to make our technical life easier. I want to thank you as well to our forum coalition partners and tell you who they are. C3 Coalition, AAUW, Edmonds College, the Daily Herald, KSCR, KXIR, NAACP, and Snow Isle Libraries. They're all helping to make this possible. Let me give you a little bit of information about the live stream to all of you in the virtual space. Thank you for joining us. This forum is being recorded and it will be available on this same YouTube channel for later viewing. So a few details before we begin. The comment feature, for those of you in the virtual space, your comment feature is enabled. It's being monitored by League members, and we are committed to civil discourse. We ask that any comments you make be respectful, and a reminder that any content that promotes harmful or dangerous behavior is not allowed, and it'll be removed. Now, we anticipate this forum will go about an hour. We're going to try to keep it to that. It may go a little over, but we want to include questions from you, our audience. So we invite you to submit questions using the comment feature. And a team of both League and AAUW members are going to consolidate your input. They'll forward your questions to me, and I will work them in as time allows. And we remind you that any question you submit will be asked of all our candidates. So we're hearing tonight from candidates seeking to represent United States Congressional District number 1. This forum's for the primary election on August 2nd. And of course, the top 2 vote getters for this race go on to the general election in November. 5 candidates filed to run, and we are so pleased to say that all 5 are participating in this forum. So the candidates for U.S. Representative Congressional District 1 listed in ballot order are Matthew Heines, Derek Chartrand, Vincent Cavaleri, Tom Spears, and Suzan DelBene. We thank all candidates for running for office and for their willingness to serve the community if elected. It's the policy of the League to be nonpartisan, so we do not support or oppose candidates or parties. We do take positions on issues which we've studied and on which we've reached consensus. I want to tell you a little bit about the ground rules for this forum. We sent them ahead to all the candidates, and they have all agreed to abide by the stated rules of decorum. They'll refrain from interrupting, personal attacks, or any kind of disruptive behavior. And as we reminded our viewers, any comments that promote harmful or dangerous behavior are not allowed, and these rules will be strictly enforced. So let me tell you a little bit about the question and answer period. The questions we're going to ask have not been shared with the candidates, and we thank those community members who reached out to us ahead of time for issues that they're interested in. I will pose the questions. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond, and I may give less time for selected questions. I will state any change very clearly. We're using a countdown timer. It's visible to all the candidates. Time limits on answers will be strictly enforced. Candidates, you know, when you see the timer turn red and you hear that chime, you're done. Order of questions. I'm going to change the order of questions each time. I'll rotate through all the candidates so we have a random and fair sequence. The order for the first question was determined by a random draw, and that order will be Suzan DelBene, then Tom Spears, then Derek Chartrand, then Matthew Heines, and then Vincent Cavaleri, and I'm going to mix it up after that. I do want to let our virtual audience know that Mr. Spears' video camera is not working. You will not see Mr. Spears, but you will hear him clearly, and we really apologize for this technical glitch. All right, let's get started. The first question asks about your qualifications And the question is this: what qualifications and experience make you a strong candidate for this position? And we begin with Ms. DelBene.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this and for bringing us together for this important forum. I'm Suzan DelBene. I currently represent the 1st Congressional District in the House of Representatives, and I have since 2012. So I've been in Congress for just about 10 years. Prior to that, I was the director of the Department of Revenue for the state of Washington. And before that, I had a long career in technology, working for small startup companies as well as large technology company. So I have a strong background in the private sector and in the public sector, and I'm very focused on getting things done. We don't help anyone if we don't put together strong policy and get it through, and know strong policy that's going to work on the ground to help workers and families, to help our communities and small businesses. I ran for Congress originally because I believe everyone in our country should have access to opportunity. My family went through a lot of struggles as I was growing up, and I feel like I had lots of opportunities because people made investments in me. We need to continue to do that for young people across the country and make sure that everyone in our country has access to great opportunities. Thank you so much for having us. I look forward to the questions.
Thank you. Same question. We now move to Mr. Spears.
Well, I am the quintessential candidate for Congress. I am exactly what was meant to happen when the founders created the Constitution. They're never meant for professional people or for people who had an agenda to run for office. They wanted people who were like them, who were like people, who were or who could identify with their neighbors, with the people they lived around, with the people they worked with. I am exactly who that is. I have been self-employed virtually all of my life. I've had to make payroll. I've been through good times and bad times. I know what it's like to be one of the people or one of the citizens that stands in the background and has to watch other people take control of their lives. A long time ago, someone asked me to run for Congress, and I said, you know, I just think that it's not bad enough to where someone like me has to get involved. Well, that's changed, and I just feel like it's the right time for someone like me.
Thank you, Mr. Spears.
People who are
I
out there just
appreciate
trying to
that.
make a
Your
living,
time is up. Thank you very
trying
much.
to get by.
We'll come
and they
back
need
at you
someone
again.
to
Mr.
speak.
Spears, your time is up. And now we're going to move to Mr. Chartrand. Mr. Chartrand, same question for you.
Hey, Vicki, thank Karen, everybody for hosting this tonight. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to the League of Women Voters. I fall somewhere right between Suzanne and Tom. I have had an opportunity here as a local resident, Washington State, born and raised here, lived overseas, have had opportunities to experience other educational cultures, returning back here to Washington, finishing up high school, and then pursuing private industry, and then eventually off to college, where I too worked in the high-tech industry for about 14 years. So from the industry perspective of understanding our 21st century economy, and then translating that into the effects that does leave with a sometimes an educational gap or an opportunity platform, I fall, like I said, right in there where we've experienced successes, we've had hardships, just as every American family has, and then successes again can be done through effort and diligence and emphasizing teamwork. One of the areas that I have is expertise within the environmental industry, where for 16 years I've delivered solutions that not only help the environment, but also help the bottom line for every business. So thank you very much for your time. I look forward to the questions.
Thank you. Next, we move to Mr. Heines. Mr. Heines, your answer.
Thank you. I'd like to first of all thank the League of Women Voters for having us on here. I'd like to also thank the candidates that are running. This is such a great country we live in, where people like us who are just working class folks are able to run against politicians who are multi-millionaires and who have made most of that money while they are in Congress. And hopefully we're going to put an end to that, because you're our constituents, not Microsoft and not the multinationals. You are our constituents. You're the ones we're working for, and you are the ones we're going to bail out, especially when I get into Congress. So let me just throw in very quickly. I grew up very poor in Sequim. My mother was married to a drunk logger, used to beat her. And I remember my Christmases were going home and listening to my drunk logger stepdad beat the hell out of my mom. So all you women out there that are afraid of the violence that is pervading our country, I'm on your side and I'm on your children's side. So I thought that teaching and education was the way forward. And so I studied. I had to go in the Army to get my college education, but I said, I'm going to be an educator because I'm going to power people. So if you want to know more, just look at my website, voteforheines.com.
Thank you. And now we'll move to our next question. And this question is going to go first to Mr. Heines. The question is about priorities. What do you see as priorities for the House regarding legislation and investigations?
I'm sorry,
And
you
we-
need to ask Vince. It's Vince's turn.
Mr. Cavaleri, did you answer the first question?
No.
Thank you. Thank you. You're right, Mr. Heines. I very much apologize. So, Mr. Cavaleri, go back to the first question. What qualifications and experience make you a strong candidate?
Thank you so much for that. First, let me say thank you to all the candidates that showed up here today to participate. It truly is inspiring knowing that you're all part of the process. And also thank you to the League of Women Voters for sponsoring today's forum. It truly is a public service that's certainly
poor
needed.
guy.
My name is Mill Creek City Councilman and Snohomish County Sheriff's Deputy Vincent Cavaleri. It's my sincere pleasure to be here today and have this conversation with everybody. I wasn't born here on the West Coast. I was born in New York. I migrated to the West Coast in 1989. First two cities I had the opportunity to visit were Wenatchee and Chelan, which began my love affair with the Evergreen State. In that time, as a councilman for the last 8 years, as a deputy for the last 22, I've raised a family of 2 wonderful children. We just welcomed our first grandchild into the world 8 months ago, a little less than 8 months ago. And it's just been a privilege living here in this state, serving my community. My hope tonight is to convince you why I'm the best choice to represent you in Washington, D.C. I look forward to the questions and certainly the collaboration with everybody here tonight. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mr. Cavalieri, and I apologize for skipping you. That won't happen again. All right, now we're going to go to Matthew Heines for the next question, again about priorities. What do you see as priorities for the House regarding legislation and investigations? What would you address first?
Well, there are we've only got 90 seconds to answer this. It could take a couple hours to do this, but obviously what we're seeing is that the legislature, the government has basically been weaponized against anybody who speaks up against the powers that be. And so when we get to Congress, and we are going to Congress, there's a lot of people, paratroopers, SEALs, Rangers, a lot of guys that served in the military and put their lives on the line. We're going to go to Congress and we're going to find out just what these games are. Because the thing is, and I'm just going to throw a little joke in here, is that why does Joe Biden keep falling down? Because he doesn't have a platform to stand on. So his platform happens to be scaring people, January 6th, and a bunch of nonsense and attacking the Supreme Court, attacking our Constitution. And basically, this is mob violence politics, and it's got to stop. The first thing that we need to do when we get to Washington is we need to clear out the bad actors. Now, this is a very dangerous country, and every woman listening to this needs to understand that we need law enforcement. but we need good law enforcement. We need law enforcement that is on our side and not weaponized law enforcement that goes against the American people.
Thank you. Same question for you, Mr. Chartrand.
Thank you, Karen. So I think the first order of business, really, as a new member of Congress, when I swear to uphold the Constitution, will be to be back in DC. First thing will be building relationships, making sure that people on the left and center understand who I am and let myself understand who they are so that we can work together. We are the United States of America, and I'm campaigning very hard on unifying our broken nation. This hasn't come overnight, so it's not going to be fixed overnight. So policies, anything that we would subject our future to is premature at this point. So building relationships, understanding the lay of the land, making sure that we have a foundation to build something sustainable will be the first course of action for me. Again, that starts with building relationships left and center, in my case, and then within my caucus. We need to make sure that those relationships build upon each other. And that's a two-way street. I call it my 3 L's: listen, learn, and then lead. We get a lot of politicians, a lot of career politicians that enjoy the converse. So we must put the people first, and together we can make a difference.
Thank you. Same question for you, Mr. Cavaleri. Your priorities.
Thank you, Karen. I think as a candidate and as a caucus, the first thing we need to do is stop the bleeding. This sustained inflation is starting to kill everybody in our nation, not just financially. We do not have choices anymore. Fuel prices at $6 a gallon for gas, economic policies that are destroying people in the inner city. We've literally come to that pivot point where we're going to have to decide to either protect and defend God's gift, which is the United States, or allow it to be overrun. And inflation, skyrocketing crime, going to have to get a hold of crime immediately. Fentanyl, killing, destroying a generation right in front of us. There's a lot to do here, but stopping the bleeding is the first thing. The first thing we have to do is literally get a hold of these finances, stop the spending, stop the bleeding, freeze the spending. And there's a couple of things I'd like to talk about later to propose to maybe enact and at least start the conversations or dialogues. But it's insane that we cannot find baby formula on the store shelves, the home heating costs and home air conditioning costs, you name it. We're destroying a generation right in front of our eyes. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we go to Mr. Spears. Same question.
Well, there are quite a few issues that this country has, and especially now. I really believe that the main thing is, and I don't think anybody can disagree, is the security of this country. Also, inflation, spending, illegal immigration. You know, these are things we could talk about forever, but they're things that people need to talk about together. Crime. I mean, all of these things, you know, that's one of the reasons I just felt compelled that I had to get in the middle of the two parties that never seem to agree on anything. My proposal after being sworn in, the first thing I'm going to propose is that there be a lottery style ping pong ball machine at the entrance to the chambers. And every Monday morning, everybody is going to pick a ball between 1 and 435, and that's where they're going to sit. They're going to sit there for a week. They're going to learn about their neighbors. They're going to learn about the people they work with. Half of Congress doesn't talk to the other half. They don't know anything about each other. They're going to have to learn why they are where they are. They make their kids do it in school. You live with your neighbors. You have to talk to them. There's no reason why members of Congress shouldn't have to talk to each other. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. DelBene, same question about priorities.
Thank you. This is an incredibly important time for us to help families, to help workers, to help businesses. In particular, we need to address supply chains, work we're doing right now. We know that the pandemic and also Russia's attack on Ukraine has impacted supply chains around the world. And so building long-term, strong, resilient, and redundant supply chains is so important for so many areas of our economy, from semiconductors, which are critical for so many, from cars to medical devices to so many products that are important to folks across the country, but also baby formula, making sure we have the agricultural goods are available around the world. So that's a top priority. Addressing climate. We've seen those impacts right here in our region, from the heat dome to the floods that we've seen right here in the 1st Congressional District. Strong response to climate because we have to make long-term investments here. Healthcare, we need to make sure the premium subsidies that families have enjoyed from the American Rescue Plan continue. Healthcare costs have been much lower. It's important that we continue that. And I supported the expanded child tax credit. We helped lift 3.7 million children out of poverty. We need to keep that going as well.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to move to the subject of elections. And this question will begin with Mr. Cavaleri. The question is this: what will you do to protect voting rights and secure election systems in Washington state and nationwide? Mr. Cavaleri.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, from the federal side, I like the system the way it is. I think this question is better resolved at the state level. I fully believe that American elections are sound to some degree. There's a lot of talk about voting fraud that goes on in the United States. That does happen. Is it the primary driving factor in this conversation about elections? We want to make sure that elections are fair. We want to make sure that they are equitable and everybody has a chance to vote. What we cannot do is allow ballot boxes to be stuffed, questions to be continually brought up every election cycle, lawsuits continually driving the news cycle, and really just stressing what our elections look like. We, for some degree, look like a kangaroo country at some point, especially last year. We cannot have January 6th happen again. We simply have to have free and fair elections in America, but there has to be transparency, and that starts with every one of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. DelBene, same question.
Well, it is critically important that we protect voting rights across the country. We have seen states try to undermine access to the ballot. And so it's important that we pass federal legislation like the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. We need to make sure that we strengthen access to the ballot for everyone in our country. We have vote by mail here in Washington state, but in many places, folks have been shutting down polling places, making it longer for folks to wait to have the right to vote, taking people off the voting rolls. So it is so important and fundamental to our democracy that we protect the right to vote. We passed legislation to strengthen that right. And the House, we'd love to see that go through the Senate because, again, that solidifies voting rights across the country and stops some of the actions we've seen at the state level. And we need to make sure young people, everyone knows how important it is that they have this incredible right and are engaged and involved in our voting process, and that everyone is taking that time to fill out their ballot in primaries and general elections, in local government as well. For our democracy to be strong, everyone across the country needs to be engaged and involved.
Thank you. Mr. Spears, same question about elections and voting rights.
Well, the Constitution allows the states to run their own elections. I think security in elections is the most important thing that we can have, and how anyone or how any state, and I'm talking about Washington state, can have you put your vote on a piece of paper and stick it in the mailbox and be called, or not a mailbox or a ballot box at a post office, whatever you want to do, how anybody can think that that's secure. I think common sense has to come into it. I don't believe it. Is it going to change an election? Maybe, maybe not. I don't see any problem with, especially in a national election, for the federal government to say, you know what, this is our election. We're going to run it by our rules. In this case, there won't be any mail-in ballots. Everyone will go vote unless someone can't. And if they can't, we're going to arrange a way for them to get there. They're going to have to identify themselves. They're going to have to know who they are. They're going to have to be a registered voter. If you can't see them, you can't vote. I know that sounds really out there, but I just think this is the most important thing a citizen can do, and it has to be controlled.
Thank you, Mr. Spears. And next to Mr. Chartrand, same question.
Thank you, Karen. Again, I think like some of the other candidates have alluded to, voting integrity is really at the state level. So to make sure that we have that, we need to partner with them to set in best practices to allow states to have a fair, transparent, and open election. I think we need to make sure that we are empowering our citizens, that they feel like their vote matters, because their vote does matter to me and to the rest of America. So if that means potentially having a federal identification opportunity for us to provide those people that have non-access for voting because of the documentation, I think we need to make it a very simple process. Common sense can solve a lot of our challenges. It's just sometimes not that common to implement. Within the states themselves, I think, again, we need fair, transparent, and participation from people that feel their vote is counting. I've lived in California for 10 years, and we had absentees. Absentee ballots are something where you still have to validate who you are to request that. If you were traveling, for example, we can implement common sense solutions that have a hybrid as we are investigating technology to make our lives more streamlined. So common sense would be my approach.
Thank you. And Mr. Heines.
Mr. Heines.
I apologize, Mr.
That is
Heines.
No problem. Yeah, I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid on this one. I agree completely with Mr. Spears, and I appreciate your comments. All right, so we live in a democracy, and the only thing that separates us from a banana republic, and I've lived in a few, is our ability to go to or to supposedly choose our leaders, right? But unfortunately, in our system, you can throw your ballot in the mail. Well, how do we know that's secure, right? And now, because the Democrats are just going to lose horribly in this next primary and in the election, they're trying to import their voters, right? So now they're saying, oh, well, if you come across the border illegally, well, the first thing you need to do is register to vote. No. So this is what we need to do, and this is what I'm going to vote for. You stand in the precinct, show your ID, and they cross you off the list like it has been done since I was a kid. Now, if you look at the history of the state of Washington, all these things started getting passed once we went over to this computerized mail-in voter system. I can't tell if my vote was ever counted. They only said, well, we can only tell if your vote came in, but you can't tell me where my vote went, right? So no, you got to be in the precinct, and if you need help getting there or whatever, then we'll figure that out. But in person, US citizen ID.
Thank you. Our next question is about climate change. Before I ask it, I want to remind our virtual audience members that if you'd like to submit a question, please do that by using the comment feature. So a question about climate change, and this we're going to start with Mr. Chartrand. What measures, if any, do you support to mitigate the impact of climate change on the Pacific Northwest and beyond? Mr. Chartrand.
There we go, mute's off. Thank you, Karen. I think you picked the right candidate here to ask that first question. For the last 16 years, I've worked in the environmental industry as a Republican, and we've implemented solutions that have reduced the carbon footprint significantly while being symbiotic with that business owner allowing them to experience fuel savings as a monetary incentive for their operational behavior modifications. Our company actually was founded after a John F. Kennedy executive order back in 1962. So since then, we diverted some of our tax obligations into research and development with the University of Wisconsin at Madison and developed our patented technology. So first thing in Congress, or Congress has the authority to allow other companies at a permanent basis to divert some of their tax obligations to fund future investment in our green technology, which is the 21st century economy. Again, it doesn't, because you're a Republican, doesn't mean you don't like the environment. I consider myself to be a compassionate capitalist and have delivered results to the industry that have helped the environment significantly over these last 16 plus years. So I would focus on common sense solutions, investing in our future technology, and doing it the right way. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. Same question now for Mr. Cavaleri.
Thank you, Karen. I think, much like all of us, I wish we could just flip a switch and say there's no need for fossil fuels. I wish we could say that, but that's a fantasy. The simple truth, and a lot of people are afraid to say it, that these renewable type energies, the technology just is not there yet on a massive scale. It's just not there. As much as we would like to say everybody has 60 million Americans have an electric car, the infrastructure doesn't exist. Fossil fuels are a part of America's life, and it's the lifeblood. Shutting down the Keystone, shutting down drilling permits and other places in Alaska, all this does is handicap and shine the light on exactly why we need fossil fuels, right? Did the Texas freeze teach us anything? Did the hijacking of a pipeline on the East Coast teach us anything? It taught us that. We fell asleep. We fell in love with this idea of just simply having renewable energies, and everybody would sing Kumbaya and we'd all be great. Everybody wants that. It's just not the reality we live in. And it's time we accept the reality that there has to be a balance. And without that balance, what you're seeing now is $6 a gallon for gas, heating prices and air conditioning prices skyrocketing through the roof, to the point where you are now destroying communities and families within it. Thank you.
Thank you. And next, same question to you, Mr. Heines, on climate change.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Cavaleri on that. You can't just shut off the spigot and then expect things to be wonderful. But unfortunately, this is not really a question of climate change or about alternative energy. It's about leadership. And to just come out and say, well, we're real rich, and I got a lot of money from China, and I got a lot of money from the mayor of Russia, and I got a lot of money through my kid from these other countries. So we're just going to shut down America's fuel industry. And not only that, we just found out Joe Biden's selling our oil to China, right? Selling our oil to China, right? So China's not real big on global or on green energy right now. They're big on American energy and getting Joe Biden to sell it to them. And nobody in the Congress, at least on the Democrat side, is saying, wait a minute, that's a national security issue. Sold our strategic reserve, right, to China. I don't think it gets any lower than that. So the fact of the matter is, yes, we have got to transfer over to green and renewable energies, but it has to be transitioned, and the American people get to be a part of that discussion. And that's what I'm going to do in Congress.
Thank you. And now Suzan DelBene, same question for you.
Thank you. This is a hugely important priority because we are far behind on our investments in climate. We are an innovative region. Washington State is poised to be a leader in clean renewable energy, and we need to make sure that we continue the investments to allow that to grow. The bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed actually had some of the largest investment in climate resilience, electrification of our infrastructure, so that we are building out towards a future where we are no longer dependent on fossil fuels. We need to continue with that effort, work on carbon capture, and also the financial incentives to help new upcoming innovations to get to scale. I also have been supportive of the Green Act, which is legislation we've been working on to provide those financial incentives, tax credits, et cetera, that will help us to continue to scale clean renewable energy. We have huge opportunities right here in areas like green hydrogen. The work happening in Washington State has been incredible, and we need to keep that going because we can be leaders not only in the country, but also around the world. And workforce is incredibly important. So the investments that we make in new technologies, we also need to invest in workforce, making sure that folks are getting the skills to take on the jobs in these new sectors so that we are in a strong position and working with our partners globally to make a difference and reduce carbon.
Thank you very much. And finally, to you, Mr. Spears, what would you tell us about climate change and the steps you would take?
Boy, where to start? Guys, I don't think anybody in their right mind can say that they're not an environmentalist. I don't think anybody in their right mind can say that there isn't climate change, because there is. The deal is, though, is that I would love to be a member of Congress and be able to be a member or sit in a committee that's talking to scientists that are not politicians, but are people who have actually studied what's causing it and what percent of it is historical, what percent of it is done by man, because I don't think anybody here knows the answer to that question. I do know that show me an electric car that'll go 500 miles on a single charge, and I don't have to wait overnight to charge it, and it's affordable and it's the car I want. I'm there. But until then, we have to come up with a way to live our lives to transition into these things that are going to make our future secure. Am I an environmentalist? Absolutely. Do I think that you can solve the problem by cutting off oil and gas exploration right now? No.
Thank you. And now we're going to move to a different topic, and the topic is that of abortion. And the question is this, and we'll be starting with you, Mr. Spears. The question is this: what legislation would you support or oppose regarding access to abortion? And please explain.
This, guys, this is an easy question to answer. I don't believe anybody, anywhere, at any time, now or in the future, has the authority to tell a woman what to do with her body. It just drives me nuts to hear this conversation going between members of opposite sides of the aisle, and how we can be so divided on this. This is a right, I'd say God-given, but it's a right that every woman has. But I'm going to say, to a degree, I can't imagine anybody on this panel believing in infanticide. I don't see that. Somewhere between conception and birth, there's got to be a number that people can get together on, and they can say, okay, this is where we draw the line. And I don't know where it is. I would love to be a part of these meetings, because it's got to be determined. But I also don't believe in abortion clinics. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but I can tell you that I don't see where anybody can take away the right of a woman to control her body.
Thank you. And we'll pass that same question on to you, Mr. Heines.
Thank you. Okay, first thing, I've been saying ever since I started running, this is a state's issue. I mean, if a state wants to have abortions, they have the right to have abortions. That's what the beauty of democracy is. But the real issue here is not that. And thank God for Clarence Thomas and the Supreme Court that came out and said, look, as a country, we're not going to legalize baby killing. Now, let me just tell you, when I was growing up, I learned about these people called the Spartans. And the Spartans, when a kid was born, they would take that kid out if it wasn't strong or it was deformed or anything, or it was just something undesirable about it, and throw it in a pile, right? And so there was a big pile of bones of all these kids that were aborted in late terms. And we're sitting there and I'm like 7th grade going, oh my God, they're doing this to these kids. That would never happen in America, but it's happening right now. And that's what this abortion thing is about. There's this debate about, well, when does life begin? When does it end? And that's up to the states and other people to decide. It's not for me to decide in the National Congress. It's not right for the National Congress to put their will on people, because people in Utah are different than people in California. So it's a states' right issue, end of story. But the real problem is you can't mob violence your way because you don't understand how the Constitution works. That's the problem.
Thank you. Next, we go to Ms. DelBene. Same question.
Thank you. This is an incredibly important question. The Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe versus Wade was devastating for women across the country, taking away their right to make their own healthcare decisions. This has been a decades-long effort by Republicans to really undermine basic human rights for millions of Americans, their privacy, their bodily autonomy. And it's heartbreaking to think that my daughter will have less rights going forward than I had at her age. The burden of this decision is going to be felt disproportionately by lower income women and women of color, folks who would have to travel for hundreds of miles to receive health care, including abortion, or be forced to carry a pregnancy. This has consequences across the board. I'll give you one example. A woman right here from Snohomish County who talked to me about a pregnancy she had that created a huge healthcare problem. Doctors said that she needed to have abortion. She said, thank God I was in a state where I could receive the healthcare I needed and be in a place where I could have a child again in the future. I strongly support and have been a co-sponsor of the Women's Health Protection Act that would codify or enshrine Roe versus Wade into law. We passed that in the House of Representatives. Congress can act and make sure that we maintain these rights, and I'll continue to push to see that happen.
Thank you. Same question for you, Mr. Cavaleri.
Thank you, Karen. First thing I'll say is I'm a pro-life candidate across the board. That applies to everything. That applies to the death penalty. That applies to euthanasia, or the so-called right to die bill that passed in Washington State. I think it's important that we understand what happened here in the Supreme Court. The mainstream media and many pundits on both sides would have you believe that we're attacking women's rights or we're going after their ability to choose. And I will tell you this: your right to have an abortion today is no different than it was yesterday or the day before, or will it be tomorrow. What the Supreme Court said is that it shall not be regulated by the federal government, and it will go back to the states where you have representatives that you can choose directly that support your viewpoint. I think the last thing we want to do as legislators is continue to stoke this fire, because honestly, we've all handled this poorly, both sides. No room for error, no room for gray area, no room for compromise on either side, simply because more people were in love with the argument rather than the facts. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Chartrand, you have the last word on this subject.
Well, I appreciate that, Karen. Thank you very much. As other on the candidate board here have indicated, Roe v. Wade will have zero impact on every single woman in the 1st Congressional District, let alone all 10 districts here in Washington State. As a state's issue, I want to protect and support all women's choices. If they choose that path, they have full access to that. I am a pro-life candidate. I would absolutely encourage anyone up until the day of termination to not terminate and to keep that child. adoption is a fantastic blessing in this environment where people who cannot have children can then upbring those children that were unwanted. They would die, they would kill themselves for opportunities to have a child carried to term. So back to the state's issues, I think that we would have zero impact for the women here in Washington State. And there is a personal story with me. My second wife, I've been married 3 times, my current wife, 20-year anniversary coming up, but my second wife married me basically as an opportunity to get pregnant. And then once she got pregnant, she terminated my pregnancy with her. And our intent was to live together forever. Yet that was not the case. And I had zero control or say in that decision. So thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to change subjects again. This next question will be about firearms. We'll begin with Ms. DelBene, and the question is this: what do you believe are the best ideas for reducing the likelihood of violent firearms incidents in the country? Ms. DelBene.
Thank you. We did pass legislation recently, bipartisan legislation, went through Congress, signed by President Biden, and that was an important step. It is the first gun reform legislation that had gone through Congress in such a long time, despite just the incredible number of mass shootings we continue to see across the country, including most recently in Highland Park, but also Uvalde, Buffalo, cases right here in our region, in Burlington, in Marysville. I believe strongly we need universal background checks. We need to ban assault weapons and high capacity magazines. There's no reason that people need to be on our streets with assault weapons, and we need to prioritize the safety of our communities. Law enforcement officers are outgunned in many cases. I've talked to our local law enforcement who've had huge concerns about the increasing availability of weapons, and with no background checks, or without weak background checks. And so there's much more we can do. Those are a few ideas that I think would make an important difference, and help us do all we can to stop this tragic cycle of gun violence in our country.
Thank you. And next we go to Mr. Spears. Same question.
I've heard one opinion on gun legislation, and I'm sure that hearing the other 3 folks, everybody's going to have somewhat of a different opinion. And each one of them, I would probably say, that sounds like a good idea. Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, that's really great. The problem with all of this is that when you look at the Constitution, it's pretty vague. It's a 1-sentence or 2-sentence statement that says that you are allowed to form a militia. Well, what does militia mean? I think back when the framers wrote the Constitution, I'm not sure they meant militia meaning a military, or whether they meant militia that regular people taking up arms and defending themselves. And that's going to be an argument forever. Right now, I just think right to bear arms is what it says. And until somebody talks me into believing that there's a limit on what you can have, then I'm.
Thank you. I'm afraid time is up. Same question to you, Mr. Chartrand.
Thank you, Karen. Can you just repeat that one last time?
Yes, I will. Happy to do that. I'll repeat a question anytime. Just ask, what do you believe are the best ideas for reducing the likelihood of violent firearms incidences in our country?
And as we've seen here over the last really 15 years, an escalation in sensationalized accounting of those types of incidents, which have been tragic to say the least. A personal friend of mine that was in Columbine on that day. So we need to be mindful of, again, common sense solutions. We need to have it as a comprehensive solution. It's not a all or nothing, ban all guns, or it's a comprehensive solution. So it won't be solved quickly. It does need to have common sense approaches. And I think that we have the ability to find consensus and common ground on elements, not the complete package, but elements that will make us safer. And that's ultimately the goal, is to reduce the harmful effect of what we have right now as an energized electorate that responds as opposed to processes common sense solutions. So again, we need to come together, because together we can make a difference, but it has to be a unified effort, and it's got to come back to the purpose of serving the people. So
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And next we go to you, Mr. Heines.
Thank you. All right, I want to show you guys some pictures here. See that? Oh, can you not see that? Oh boy, I don't know if you can see that. Oh, you can't see it. Anyway, story is, a friend of mine got his car stolen. It was an Escalade, and he gets it back. Actually, the police say, "Oh, we found your car." So he goes to get it. It's full of guns. It's full of automatic weapons, right? And it's full of these bullets. You can't see this, I guess, but dum-dums, hollow points. And so these criminals stole his car and left it somewhere, and it's full of like heroin and drugs and other stuff and guns, right? And he tells the police, "Hey, you know, there's this thing's full of guns and drugs." And they said, "Oh, what, really?" And because the police couldn't even look inside of the car, right? And if you steal a car in Seattle or rape somebody, the police won't even investigate it anymore, right? Because that's what the Democrats have done to us. So as far as the gun violence, first of all, I would tell the Democrats to stop encouraging violence, right? Because these kids see this stuff on the TV, and they see the hate, and they see, you know, I don't matter for anything anymore because I'm not the right color, I'm not the right this, I'm not the right that. And that is the big problem. We're under an invasion right now, and the Democrats want to make sure they have guns coming across the border, but you don't. What do you really think is going on?
Thank you. And finally to you, Mr. Cavaleri.
Thank you, Karen. It seems that the bad guys don't have a problem obtaining weapons. It seems that all the weapons out there, it's not legal gun owners. In case of Chicago, though, however, this was. As we start to dissect Chicago a little bit, I'm sure you'll see the parents get charged at some point for their culpability. But our Constitution was pretty clear and pretty concise. It says the rights of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. We had the Heller case in 2008 and the recent Supreme Court decision in 22, which affirmed exactly that. The problem with bans, and here's where I disagree with the other members of the panel, whether it's a ban on ammo, whether it's a ban on magazines, whether it's a ban on concealed carry, background checks, red flag laws, all of these, they're not working. They're not working whatsoever. They're pinpricks, and all of these places that lead in violence have the most restrictive gun laws. So banning and creating barriers for legal gun owners to possess weapons is not the answer, and I would oppose it adamantly, and understand that when we arrest these guys, and I do this for a living, they need to stay in jail. Prosecutors need to prosecute, and judges need to make sure they hand down sentences that are applicable. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're now going to move to a question, an issue that's arisen from the audience. And I'm going to ask Nadine Shanti, who is our other moderator, to present that question. Nadine, are you ready to come on and present the question? Good, go right ahead.
Yes, I am. And I believe that we want to move the timer to 1 minute for this.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The question that came from the audience, which our wranglers thought was pretty important, and one that we agree. This
Nadine, let me step in. You were having a little trouble with your feed. So the question, as I understand it, is if you're elected, what ideas do you have for working productively with your staff or colleagues or members of the public whose ideas are different from yours? And I'm going to start that question with Mr. Heines.
Oh, of course you would. Well, first of all, we're all in the same country. We're all God's children, and we all got to love each other. So I have lots of friends that are on the other side of issues and whatever. And the first thing is you listen to them, right? Because they might actually know something that you don't. And the problem with our culture right now is you have, and I'll take Seattle for an example. You have one company, Sinclair, owns ABC, King 5, and they own Fox, right? So they got you all on the string, right? And they're giving the left this information and they're giving the right this information. Well, as Ronald Reagan said, we don't really have any differences. We just have different histories. Well, that's my thing. Listen to what people have to say. If you can refute the argument, if maybe you can educate them, then that's what you do.
Thank you. 60 seconds is shorter, isn't it? So same question. We're going to go next to Mr. Chartrand.
Thank you, Karen. To that question, the ultimate answer is listening first, learning from what you've heard, and then leading. We will be elected by the electorate here in Washington State's 1st Congressional District. So that's my duty, is to represent them on the issues that are paramount to them. Working within staff, I have in the past worked for a member of Congress during my time in the Bay Area. I was not on his physical staff, so we were part of the operation, but I've seen dynamics that really are successful. He was a consummate servant leader. He was a person that was truly engaged in what the constituents responding to his votes. Working with people of different viewpoints, it's very easy. Again, listen first, learn from what they've said, and then again, as an elector, I would then lead through that process.
Thank you. And Mr. Cavaleri, what are your thoughts on this question?
This is a great question, and thank you to the person that answered it, because she or he is echoing exactly what the country feels, what's wrong with DC and really most legislators in general. That partisanship has dug its heels in on both sides of the aisle, and no one gets clean hands on this. And that when they go to DC, when they go to Olympia or whichever venue, that is the order of the day, and that is what's broken, and that's what needs fixing. So I've made a career in my city, both in the sheriff's office and in the city of Mill Creek, of building coalitions. The majority of our votes are 7-0. You have a split mix of 3 and 3 and 1 independent in the city of Mill Creek, yet most of our bills and ordinances are unanimous. Most of our budgets are balanced unanimously. Most of anything we do is done collectively, and that is how it's supposed to be. So thank you so much for asking that question and shining a light on very important issues.
Thank you so much. And next, Mr. Spears, what would you say to that question?
Well, communication is the key, and it's speaking to your neighbors. I would open up I can't say that I would open up my office to everybody, because you never get anything done. But you have to listen to everybody. You have to make yourself available to everybody. And I'm going to go back to an answer that I gave, or part of an answer that I gave before. The problem with Congress, and not just Congress, the Senate, the president, you name it, none of them listen to each other. They don't know anything about each other. They don't know where they came from, who they are, why they think they are. I told a friend about the ping pong ball issue, about getting into Congress and having to pick a ping pong ball, and you have to sit there for a week and you have to talk to people you've never talked to before. He said, you know what? I'd give anything to be able to sit next to AOC in Congress and just talk to her and find out what makes her tick and why she feels the way she does.
Thank you for that. And finally to you, Ms. DelBene, same question.
Thank you. I agree. This is a great question. And I feel really honored representing a purple district, the first congressional district today, a purple district, and being able to hear differing points of view and being able to take those points of view into account. I think it makes you a better legislator. I've also led by example. 2 bills right now we're working on, one to address issues with prior authorization that delays seniors access to healthcare. We have over 300 co-sponsors in the House, strongly bipartisan, which is almost unheard of these days. Also legislation to expand the affordable housing tax credit so we can build more affordable housing across the country. Also strongly bipartisan. I've worked closely with Republicans to make sure that we're putting strong policy through. We don't help anyone until we get legislation through the House, through the Senate, and to the president's desk. And that means building coalitions to make it happen. That's been something I've been focused on my entire time in Congress, and so important for us to continue to do.
Thank you so much. Well, we've made it to our final question, and this really is a question that's going to allow you to speak to either an issue that we've raised before that you'd like to spend a little more time with, or other information. Just 60 seconds on the clock. That is a short amount of time. But the question is this: what additional issues or information would you like to bring to the attention of the community? And we're going to start with Mr. Cavaleri.
Let me unmute. Thank you again, Karen. Well, if we're going to pick one, I'll say this: public safety. Nothing in a community can work if the citizenry isn't safe. Our young men, our family, our women, all of them need to be able to travel through the cities, through the towns, without fear of getting their cars taken, their catalytic converters stolen at night, where girls can take community transit without fear of being pushed on the subway tracks, or young ladies can work a second job at a furniture store without being stabbed. This is happening every day. We talk about gun violence. Let's talk about violence, where it's happening, where it's manifesting. I will make sure that we start taking proactive steps to start addressing this directly. I think someone said earlier that mob rule cannot exist, and he or she, whoever said it, is absolutely right. And that's what we have. Until you get a handle on the crime, nothing will work. Everything starts there with civility in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. And to you, Ms. DelBene, any additional information or issues you'd like to raise?
Well, one thing I want to talk about is the expanded child tax credit. It was important legislation that was included in the American Rescue Plan that allowed families to have checks. With the child tax credit was expanded so that folks were able to get checks monthly to help take care of their families. We lifted 3.7 million children across the country out of poverty, and I helped lead this effort. I think that it's incredible policy. Families were using the money to pay for housing, for food, for diapers. Kids don't grow up in a few months. This is policy that I think should be made permanent, and the data is incredibly strong, the impact it has on kids if they grow up with a strong upbringing and have the economic support. We have incredible results for our community and much better outcomes for our kids. So want to see us continue to expand the child tax credit. I'll keep fighting for that.
Thank you. And Mr. Spears, to you. Additional issues or information?
Security of our country is number one of everything that we've talked about today. Security of our neighborhoods is number two of everything we've talked about today. If we don't have either one of those, we've got 2 countries not that far away from us, because this isn't a very big world. We have 2 countries that watch everything we do. We may watch what they do, but they're watching to find out where the cracks are and where they can stick a crowbar and where they can pry us apart. And if we let them continue to watch us tear ourselves apart, their task is going to be pretty easy if they decide that we've gotten weak enough to let them in. And guys, if we get to that point, it won't matter who we are here today, because we're going to live in an entirely different world.
Thank you. And Mr. Chartrand, same question to you.
Hey, Karen, thank you very much. I'd just like to actually add some value here. I'd like to actually respectfully challenge Ms. DelBene's assertion that she is proud to represent a purple district. If we compare her voting record with the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, she's voted 95% with the Speaker of the House. So do not be disingenuous or insult my intelligence. And other voters also will feel that same way. So please do not express it in that way. I will represent all of us in the 1st Congressional District. We have the ability to come together to listen, learn, and then lead, and do that in a way that uplifts everyone. I think we need to mute that observer there, but what I would do is term limits is my #1 campaign platform. We need to modify our term limits. We have too many career or lifetime politicians, and I will just do that. Chartrand4congress.com.
Thank you. I'll remind all of our observers to please be sure you're on mute. And for our last final answer to our last question, Mr. Heines, you have the floor.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to point out, I've been saying bad things about the Democrats, but there is good news. The Democrats have come out with a new economy car. Doesn't work. I have 3 things that I think are important: education, education, and education. If you look around at these unhinged kids, they don't understand anything about how the country works. They don't understand how to get a job, and they feel really disempowered. They're frustrated. They're frustrated with what they see. Now, you can say whatever you want, but if we do not start educating these kids on how to get a job, on how to do the things that they need to do to survive, then you know what? In about 40 years, they're going to be fighting each other with sticks, and they're going to be eating each other just to stay alive. There is no substitute for a quality education. I got one, and that's the only thing that got me out of poverty. And I want to give that opportunity to every student, every kid, everywhere.
Thank you. And I want to thank all of our candidates. It is tough to answer these serious issue questions. I want to thank our live stream audience for sticking with us. We ran a little bit over time, but we're going to close it out now. The League appreciates these candidates for joining us and for running for office. And a reminder that a recording of this forum and others are available on the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County website and our YouTube channel. And you can find links at lwvsnoho.org. And we encourage you to please explore additional information about these and all candidates. Vote411.org, sponsored by the League of Women Voters, is a good source of nonpartisan voting information. Now, your voters' pamphlets and ballots are being mailed to residences this week, and Election Day is August 2nd, and we remind you that in our state, you can register and vote up to Election Day. Please be a voter. I want to thank the team who made this forum possible. I'm going to name them: Vicki Roberts-Gassler, Karen Madsen, Sandra Distelhorst, Shirley Bono, Lynn Carpenter, Nadine Shanti, Janet Kessler, Phyllis Bush, and Starlin Nakos. And a special thank you again to David Moon and his team of students at TurkPride.tv at the Salton School District for their excellent technical support. To all our candidates for joining us, thank you. This concludes our candidate forum. Thank you all. Have a great evening.